ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ವೆಲ್ಕಮ್ ಟು ದಿ ಲರ್ನಿಂಗ್ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ ಸೀರೀಸ್ ಕಂಡಕ್ಟೆಡ್ ಬೈ ಡಿಪಾರ್ಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಲೇಜ್ ಎಜುಕೇಷನ್ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ. This is session number 11. In this session, we are going to discuss what are the determinants of working capital. So we can recap what we already discussed in previous session. In previous session, we discussed what are the needs for working capital, and we also discussed the importance of working capital, and if company maintains sufficient working capital, what are the advantages they gain, and if company maintain excessive working capital, what are the disadvantages, and all these things we discussed in previous session. In this session we are going to in this session, what are the objectives of the chapter is, in this session we are going to discuss the what are the factors that are going to influence the when the company sets the amount of working capital. The session outcome ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು see after this session the students able to understand the factors affecting the working capital or determinants of the working capital. So first ನಾವು ಡಿಸ್ಕಸ್ ಮಾಡೋಣ ಡಿಟರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್. ದಿ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಈಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಯೂನಿಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಇನ್ ಆಲ್ ಎಂಟರ್ಪ್ರೈಸಸ್. ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಎಂಟರ್ಪ್ರೈಸಸಲ್ಲಿ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಸೇಮ್ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. And therefore the factors responsible for particular size of the working capital in one company are different than the other enterprise. ಎಲ್ಲ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಂಪ್ನಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಂಪ್ನಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಸೇಮ್ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಂಪ್ನಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಸಮ್ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸಸ್ ವೈರ್ ಸೆಟ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ದಿ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್. ಯಾವ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಡಿಸ್ಕಸ್ ಮಾಡೋಣ. ಸೊ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ ನಂಬರ್ 1, ಫಸ್ಟು ಸೈಜ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್. This is one of the important factor that going to influence determines the amount of working capital. Working capital requirement of a firm directly influenced by the size of its operation. If company size is big, if in case of big organization, it require more amount of working capital compared to the small business organization. So if company size is more, the requirement of working capital also more. ಕಂಪ್ನಿ ಸೈಜ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಅವರ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್, ನೇಚರ್ ಆಫ್ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್. Another important factor which determines the amount of working capital is nature of business. The working capital requirement depends upon the nature of the business carried by them. Normally manufacturing industries compared to the trading or service industries. In case of manufacturing industry, ನಾವು ಟ್ರೇಡಿಂಗ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಾಂದರೆ ಸರ್ವಿಸ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ಗೆ ಕಂಪೇರ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಮ್ಯಾನುಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಚರಿಂಗ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ಗೆ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಟು ಇನ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮೋರ್ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ಕರೆಂಟ್ ಅಸೆಟ್ಸ್ ಕಂಪೇರ್ ಟು ಸರ್ವಿಸ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿ. ಸರ್ವಿಸ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಕಂಪೇರ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಮ್ಯಾನುಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಚರಿಂಗ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಈಸ್ ಮೋರ್. So if ours is a manufacturing industry, requirement of working capital is more. So nature of business also influences by setting the amount of working capital. Next point, storage time or processing period. Storage time and processing period. Processing period ಅಂದರೆ ರಾ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ಸ್ ತರ್ತೀವಿ, ಆ ರಾ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ಸ್ನ ಪ್ರೋಸೆಸ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಫಿನಿಶ್ ಗೂಡ್ಸಾಗಿ ಮ್ಯಾನುಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಚರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ರಾ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ಸ್ ತಂದು ಗೂಡ್ಸನ್ನ ಪ್ರೋಸೆಸ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅದು ಫಿನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಪ್ರಾಡಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಆಗಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಟೈಮ್ ಹಿಡಿಸುತ್ತೋ ಅಂಥ ಟೈಮ್ ನಾವೇಂತೀವಿ ಪ್ರೋಸೆಸಿಂಗ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಅಂತೀವಿ. ಕೆಲವು ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೋಸೆಸಿಂಗ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಲೆಂತಿ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಕೆಲವು ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೋಸೆಸಿಂಗ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಶಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾವ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೋಸೆಸಿಂಗ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಲೆಂತಿ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೋ ಅಂಥ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸಲ್ಲಿ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಟು ಇನ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮೋರ್ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ರಾ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ಸ್. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ರಾ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲಿಂದ ನಮಗೆ ಔಟ್ಸೈಡ್ ಬಂದು ಅದು ಫಿನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಗೂಡ್ಸ್ ಆಗಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ ಟೇಕ್ಸ್ ಲಾಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಟೈಮ್. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್, ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್. Credit period allowed to customers is also one of the important major factor which influences the requirement of working capital. So ನಮ್ಮ ಕಸ್ಟಮರ್ಸ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಎಷ್ಟು ದಿನ ಸಾಲ ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ. ಕೆಲವು ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ 10 days ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಕೆಲವು ಕಂಪ್ನೀಸು 20 days ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಕೆಲವು 1 month ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಕೆಲವು 45 days ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಇಟ್ ಡಿಪೆಂಡ್ ಅಪಾನ್ ದಿ ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ಕನ್ಸರ್ನ್. ನಮ್ಮ ಕಸ್ಟಮರ್ಸ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಎಷ್ಟು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್ ಕೊಡ್ತೀವೋ we have to invest more amount of capital in the form of working capital. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಸೊ ದೇರ್ ಈಸ್ ಎ ಲಾಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಡೇಟಾಸ್ ಸಂಖ್ಯೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾವಾಗ ಡೇಟಾಸ್ ಸಂಖ್ಯೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೋ ಮತ್ತೆ ನಾವು ಇನ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್ ಶಾರ್ಟೇಜ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದು ಲಿಮಿಟೆಡ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದರೆ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ನೋ ನೀಡ್ ಟು ಇನ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಇನ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಇನ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡೋ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್ ಅಲೋಡ್ ಟು ಕಸ್ಟಮರ್ ಈಸ್ ಅನದರ್ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ factor that going to influences the requirement of the working capital. Next, seasonal requirement. In certain businesses, raw materials is not available throughout the year. Such businesses organization has to buy the raw material in bulk during the season to ensure the uninterrupted flow and process them during the entire year. For example, sugar industry. Sugar industry is a seasonal industry. Sugar industry and there is some other industries are there like woolen, textile. These are the seasonal industries. These seasonal industries run only at the time of season. Such as for example, sugar industry produces particularly all the sugar between December and April. So in particular in between December to April, they require more amount of working capital than compared to some other months. Maybe woolen textile industry makes its majority of sales during the winter ಸೀಸನಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಮೆಜಾರಿಟಿ ಅವ್ರು ಉಲ್ಲನ್ ಪ್ರಾಡಕ್ಟ್ನ ಸೆಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಯಾವಾಗ ವಿಂಟರ್ ಬರುತ್ತೋ ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಟು ಇನ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮೋರ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಇನ್ ಆರ್ಡರ್ ಟು ಸೆಲ್ ದೇರ್ ಪ್ರಾಡಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ more in the season of winter. So seasonal requirements of variations also influences the amount of working capital. Next point, potential growth or expansion of business. Potential growth, another important factor which influences the amount of working capital is potential growth. If there is the opportunity for growth and expansion of our business, we have to invest more and more. If our company is if the business is to be extended in future, more working capital is required. Obviously more amount of working capital is required to meet the expansion needs of the business. If have the chances of expansion, we have to invest more. Next point, changes in price level. Changes in price levels also affects the working capital requirement. Generally, the rise in the price require the firm to maintain large amount of working capital as more funds will be required to maintain sales level of current assets. Price level is one of the important factor which influences the requirement of the working capital. If price level of a firm has to maintain large amount of working capital, they has to maintain more. Next, dividend policy. The dividend policy of the firm is an important determinant of working capital. The need for working capital can be met with the retained earnings. If firm retains more profit and distributes lower amount of dividend, it needs less working capital. Dividend policy of a company as indirect factor that going to influence the amount of working capital. How a company going to pay dividends to its shareholders? They can pay a dividend in different forms. If company wants to pay dividend in cash, they has to maintain more working capital. So if company has to pay dividend in form of bonds, they has to maintain less working capital. The dividend policy as a company has a direct influence on the amount of working capital. Next point, access to money market. Other important factor which influences the amount of working capital is access to money market. If firm has good access to the capital market, it can raise loan from bank and other financial institutions. It results in minimization of need for working capital. We have good access to the money market. ನಮಗೆ ಯಾವಾಗ ಬೇಕೋ ಅವಾಗ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಮನಿ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ ನಮಗೆ ಫಂಡ್ಸ್ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ. ನಾವು ಫಂಡ್ಸ್ ಈಸಿಯಾಗಿ ಮೊಬಿಲೈಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂದರೆ we can maintain less amount of working capital, because we can, whenever need arises, we can easily mobilize the working capital. ಇಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಕೈಲಿ ಈಸಿ ಮೊಬಿಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಫೈನಾನ್ಸ್ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಟು ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ more amount of funds in the working capital. So access of money market is another important factor that going to influence the amount of working capital. Next, working capital cycle. When the working capital cycle of a firm is long, it will require large amount of working capital. But if working capital cycle is short, it will needs less working capital. See, working capital cycle means, see, amount, the period of loan, period of capital which we invested in raw materials, that raw materials will be converted into finished goods, that finished goods will be sold in the market, then money is again comes to the company, then again that money invested in the raw materials, then raw materials get processes, then raw materials converted into finished product. This cycle happens. That working capital cycle period is short, we have to invest less amount in the working capital. If working capital cycle is too long, we have to invest more amount of working capital in, we have to invest more funds in the working capital. Last point is operating efficiency. Another important factor which influences the requirement of amount of working capital is operating efficiency. The operating efficiency of a firm also affects the firm's need of working capital. The operating efficiency of the firm results in optimum utilization of assets. The optimum utilization of assets in turn results in more funds raised for working capital. See how company going to utilizing its fixed assets. That is very important question. If company utilizing their fixed assets efficiently, optimally, the amount of utilization of assets in turn results in the more funds released for working capital. If company is using their fixed assets well and good, they require more amount of working capital. Next we go for multi-choice questions. Question number 1. Which are the factors which influence the working capital? First one is nature of business, size of business, credit period, all the above. ಸೊ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್, ಯಾವ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಡಿಸಿಷನ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಪರಿಣಾಮ ಬೀಳುತ್ತೆ? ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ನೇಚರ್ ಆಫ್ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಸೈಜ್ ಆಫ್ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಕ್ರೆಡಿಟ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್, ಈ ಮೂರು ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಓಕೆ, ಈ ಮೂರು ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ ದಟ್ ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಇನ್ಫ್ಲುಯೆನ್ಸ್ ದಿ ನೇಚರ್ ಆಫ್ also influences the requirement of working capital. So answer will be all of the above. Is dividend policy influences the working capital decision? 100% yes. Already we discussed that dividend policy, how company going to pay its dividends to the shareholders, whether it is that going to pay in form of cash or they are going to pay form of with bond or stock. If they want to pay dividend in form of cash, they have to maintain more working capital. So answer will be yes. Dividend policy of a company influences the working capital policy of the company. Is changes in price level influences the working capital decision? Yes. If price level changes also influences the working capital decisions of a company. Is nature of business influences the working capital decision? Yes, already we discussed that. If nature of business, if company is a manufacturing company, it requires more funds in the current assets. If it is a service industry, that industry requires less amount of funds in the current assets. Is seasonal variation of a business influences the working capital decision? 100% yes, because already we discussed that some seasonal industries like the sugar manufacturing industry or woolen textile industry, these are the seasonal industries which run the business in particular season. Okay, if season comes, they have to increase their production. In order to increase their production, they have to invest more amount of working capital. Thank you.